Hello, hello.
Welcome back.
Welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be diving into a topic I think that is really important. We mentioned it at the end of our last episode, and we had so many people commenting that they felt the same way. We're going to be exploring why is it that some women, most women, a lot of people feel as though when they get to their 30s, they're suddenly a different person. It almost seems as though the life maybe that they've been living in their 20s has been a bit of a lie. They've had this wake-up call. They've suddenly realised who they are. Perhaps they thought what they had wanted in life is no longer what aligns with themselves. And I think today we're going to start exploring some of the reasons behind that and where those thoughts and feelings come from.
Yeah, well, I think if you think about when you're 20, you haven't experienced life the way you would have experienced it towards the end of your 20s. And you're just looking for something that, I don't know, to just make more sense of your life and your purpose and what you like and what you don't like. And I think we all go through that stage more towards your end of your 20s, where you just feel like you're looking for authenticity in your life. It can come to relationships, friendships, in anything in your life. And I think you feel lost. That's how most women feel at that stage when we hit that end of 20s. We just feel lost and we don't know what to do. We feel like life is not quite how we want it. And I think that's when it all, well, call it midlife crisis if you want to call it midlife crisis at 30. But I think that's when we all just think, we need to sit down now and just kind of go over what is it that we really want out of life, and our friendships and out of our relationships, if we've been with someone for a very long time, if we've had kids, that's a big thing again, that's got big impact in your 20s. If you've had your children really, really early, which we both had, we can relate to that. And I think it's just a mixture of emotions as women that we go through, where we do get a wake-up call at 30, and it can be really scary and it can be quite tough to accept that our feelings are the way they are. And it's nothing wrong. It's just a moment for you to just be able to sit down and reevaluate what's important for you in life and what you want to do about it.
Yeah, I think that's so true. And some people will get to this point and absolutely thrive off it and will really channel that energy and direct it into something that is meaningful for them. And then there'll be others who will really struggle with this and struggle to make sense of why they're feeling this way, feeling as though the life that they've been living is a lie. They may have lost their purpose, lost their way, and really struggling to find that direction. And like you said, a lot of women will be really struggling with interpreting those feelings and perhaps thinking, well, I thought that was the life that I wanted, and I've reached this point and it's not as fulfilling as I imagined it. I think it's really important to look back at what has conditioned us when we're in our 20s. And a big part of that is, we have society conditioning. We have obviously the boom of social media. We could talk about those all day. I think what really relates to a lot of people is thinking about attachment styles and how our attachment styles really shape those key relationships that we make throughout our 20s. So you mentioned friendships, relationships, looking for more authenticity. And I think that stems from actually when we start to branch out into the world, when we're in our early 20s and we start meeting new people, and we automatically crave a relationship that is reflective of our childhood attachments. And I think if those attachments haven't necessarily been secure, healthy attachments, that can really impact on the partners or the friends that we choose to spend our time with, because we're constantly seeking that validation of this is familiar, this is what I know, even if what you knew was unhealthy.
Yeah, I mean, attachment styles, it's a big one. I think we all struggle with it. And I mean, I've definitely I can tell that I've got some attachment styles, like two of them. But I think it's difficult. Your 20s are for learning, for making mistakes, for figuring out life, for figuring out what you like, what you don't like. It's hard if you are in a position where you've had children when you were really young. And it's not just to find an excuse, because this is not what we're talking about here. It genuinely puts you in a position where you do have to mature overnight. It doesn't give you a choice. You have to be an adult overnight and look after a child. And I think in your 20s, that's really hard, and it will hit you in a way that you've never been hit before, and you'll feel lost even in that moment in time. And then what happens? You are figuring out life as it is, maturing. And then all of a sudden you realize, hang on, actually, I'm getting closer to my 30s here. And all I've been doing throughout my 20s is look after my children. And which bear in mind, that's not a bad thing. But we're talking about feeling lost in our 30s here. And it's really important to look back at your 20s and what have you experienced in your 20s? What was your biggest key things in your 20s that you've gone through? Have you had children, or is there been a big event in your 20s that kind of made you feel a bit lost in your 30s? And it's really important to look back sometimes and analyze what's happened and try and make sense of it, because that's the only reason why you will feel lost when you get to 30s, when you've not really sat down and thought about it in your 20s. You've just went with it. You went with the flow, which, by the way, you are meant to go with the flow in your 20s. Like we said before, you're meant to experience different things, go travel the world, make your mistakes, learn from them. But then, if you've not been able to do that, then where you're left with that emotion, if you've not been able to have that experience of life, and then you get to 30s and I feel like you almost rebel and you have a midlife crisis, because you just think,
less of the midlife, please. Thank you.
I know, but it's just, it literally is just like, oh my goodness, I've been an adult for the whole of my 20s. What the hell now? Like, what happens now?
What does happen now?
Yeah. Gosh.
So, no, do you know what? I totally agree with you.
Just not the rebellious stage.
No, I agree with that as well.
Yeah, let's just get back to normality
Totally agree
here.
with that. Anyway, getting back to it, the professional side of it. I think, I was thinking as you were speaking about, going through the motions in your 20s, it's like being on a hamster wheel. I definitely felt that. And I think a lot of people that I've spoken to feel as though they have all of these expectations placed on them to reach certain milestones at certain ages, or even just that's what is expected of you. You are expected to find a partner. You're expected to buy a house. You're expected to settle down. You're expected to have children, and you're expected to go to work. And I think for a lot of people, they just coast through those expectations without really thinking, okay, well, does this align with what I actually want? Or am I just going through those motions, like you said, of exploring life? And I think that is when the realization hits, is when people start to realize that they've been masking for quite a lot of the time. And what I mean by masking is that keeping up appearances, of going with the flow, of trying to fit into society norms and society expectations. But then also that might be from a partner's expectations. It might be from the crowd of people that you surround yourself with, because that is so important. Our closest people in our lives really shape and influence who we are. So if you're surrounding yourself with a group of friends, or you're in a relationship that doesn't truly align with your values, it'll creep into your well-being, and you'll start to experience poor well-being because you're constantly trying to put on a mask of being somebody that isn't your true authentic self.
See, that's a hard one though, isn't it? Because there's so much pressure on one individual then to figure out what's going on in their head when you do have the outside noise. And I always ask this question to myself. I said, who puts all of these pressures on us? Obviously, it's the society, what we see on social media, and what happens in the background. And do we really need to be married with kids by 30 and have a house and have life figured out? No. I think that's a preference. Again, do you want to be settled down by 30? That's the question you should be asking yourself. Not, I have to, because that's two different things, isn't it? And I think it's just, again, we go back to social media, society, and the only reason why I keep mentioning and repeating myself, because it's the main issue of it all. It's in the center where it all starts from, and we're all stuck to these screens and we're looking at social media, and we've realized that, it's making you question, am I where I should be am I doing what I should be doing, or am I at the stage that I should be having everything figured out? It's all these questions that you will ask yourself. And bear in mind, you might be having a great life, and you might be, like you said, coasting and, thinking that your life is great and there's no problem. And then you find yourself in a situation where you are questioning yourself a lot on a daily basis, which will get you in that mindset. I just think that a few things that you need to ask yourself is, what do you want? What is that you crave as a person? Not what your mum and dad, your friends, what social media or whoever on social media you've seen is saying. What is it that you want? What do you want to be settled down by 30? Do you want to buy a house by 30? Do you want to be successful in your career by 30? There's all of these questions that you need to ask yourself, because I think the more you focus on what you want and not what everyone else wants around you, the more you'll be able to be a bit more honest with the answers that you're going to give yourselves.
I think one of the main factors, what happens with people, I think people have to understand, and it's really important for your own self-development to understand how we are conditioned as human beings. It's a real sort of psychological and biological blueprint to it. Our beliefs, our mindset, our relationships are all shaped by our experiences of our childhood. So attachment styles in particular, but how we interact with our closest circle. So that could be, parents, grandparents, siblings, and the interaction between them. So what is happening in the family home at that time. Also our experiences of school and early friendships. All of those really shape our belief system. It creates this internal working model. It's almost as though we have a pair of glasses and we see the world through that lens of conditioning that our early childhood taught us. This is how the world works because this is all I've ever known. This is how people react because all these closest people around me react like this. And so your brain and your body forms that model, that shape, that mold of the world and how relationships should be. And that is then reinforced as you're going throughout childhood, as you're going through adolescence, right up until your early to mid-20s, because you are still, in terms of brain development, your brain is still developing and shaping and growing. And what happens then is you seek out people who confirm that mindset. So if, for example, you had an early relationship with a parent or a caregiver that you were quite anxious with. Maybe it was a household that you were constantly worried or constantly seeking validation or seeking support. Maybe your parents, split up. Maybe one parent was more emotionally unavailable than another. You will have learned that is the way people are, and that creates this anxious attachment style. So by the time you are a young adult and you're exploring the world and you're building your own relationships through choice, your choice will be something that confirms your reality. So your reality being that bias, that kind of model and that mold of how relationships should be. So you'll then seek out a partner that kind of maybe mirrors the way that your parents were with you. So if you had an emotionally unavailable parent, you might find yourself actually seeking out partners that are emotionally unavailable. The same way that if you had an emotionally reactive parent, you might then find yourself with a partner who is emotionally reactive, because we seek out that comfort of the norm, even if that norm isn't healthy. It's our body's way of telling us that actually, oh no, we're safe because this is what we know. And then the difference, I think, the big wake up call happens when people start understanding those patterns and actually meeting new people. And this is where I think social media plays a big part, but also just being out there in the wider world, getting a job, meeting new people who bring a different perspective into your life, because it suddenly challenges that bias and that narrative that you've always held. And you start to question, well, actually, maybe all people aren't like that. And maybe actually there is a different way of living. There is, actually a different way of feeling. Actually, this person really calms my nervous system and I feel really safe and fun around this person. Whereas I've not experienced that in relationships before. I've always experienced that really high intensity, high emotional reactivity, or maybe emotional neglect. And I thought that was the norm. But now, I'm reaching this older adulthood, I'm kind of realizing there's more out there to the world.
Oh, that's heavy, that, isn't it? Oh, God, I was finding myself really daydreaming, thinking about I've just gone back to my childhood just straight away while you were talking. But honestly, it just makes you think. Obviously, when you're in your 20s, as we said before, friendships, relationships, you will have a different reaction to what you would be having in your 30s. And I think that, like you said, it just comes down to your patterns, what you were used to, in the past, and what you've been, brought up to believe that it's normal. And I definitely found myself when I was 20, early 20s, that I thought that I was very quite in touch with my emotions, and I still think that I was to this day, but I was slightly emotionally unavailable in some parts, but I didn't recognize that when I was 20. And my relationship, my partner at the time was very not emotionally available. So for me, in a way, that kind of worked and didn't work, because I thought that I'm quite in touch with my emotions, and I thought, oh, why is he emotionally unavailable, and it was a bit of a clash. But as I grew a bit and I got into my 30s, I had to sit down with myself and actually recognize that I'm the one that's emotionally unavailable. And you know what, it was really hard to admit that to myself, because I thought, all this time I thought that I was the one that was really in touch with my emotions, and I wasn't. But it took me so long to realize that. And it would only come across when we would have a conversation about it. And the more you communicate with someone in that regard, the more you can realize what your attachment styles is. Because how would you know? You will never know if you don't have that conversation with someone else, that maybe it's outside your family, or maybe it's not your partner, or someone that has got a bit of a different view in life, that can open your eyes a little bit of how you've been reacting in your 20s. I mean, we can all relate that we've been a little bit more immature and reactive, and I definitely was very impulsive in my 20s and would just do things and regret it literally 5 minutes later. But I think that's just a part of growing up.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I think you're right. You know, when you start meeting new people and having those different conversations, having a broader perspective on life, you start peeling back the layers of yourself. And I think a big question to ask yourself is, do you recognize those feelings of being unfulfilled in past relationships? Because if you were constantly searching for something, and I hear this quite often with the women that I work with, it almost feels as though they say, well, all of those risks I was taking, or, you know, all of those ways I was reacting, I was feeling as though I was trying to fulfill something. It was almost like a void inside me that was just never quite satisfied. It's as though they were searching for something that they hadn't quite yet found. And that is your true authentic self. It's when you start peeling back the layers and you start having these different experiences and you realize that actually this is more of the person that I want to be. They're more of the people that actually feel like home to me. I feel safe around. I feel like I can be myself. I don't feel as though I have to overly explain. And I think a big one is somebody who makes your nervous system feel calm. And by that, I mean, you know, do you just feel relaxed? Are conversations easy? You don't have to hide a particular part of yourself. You don't have to pretend to be somebody else. There's no expectation there. There's no pressure there. And it's when you start to enjoy relationships in that way is when you start to realize what you truly value in this world and where you want that direction for yourself to go in. And that can be hugely liberating, but it can also be hugely, you know, uncomfortable, because people then suddenly realize actually to become who I want to become, I might have to shed a part of myself that I've always known. And that might be friendships, that might be relationships. But it's important that you understand that process is a part of life. We can't all go through life really staying the same as we were, because we don't ever have that self-actualization of becoming who we truly are meant to be, our greatest selves, if you like, or, you know, have the greatest relationships and really enjoy life as we truly are meant to, if we don't shed those old layers.
Yeah, but if you look back, you don't know anyone that's the same in their 20s like they are in their 30s. There's just no way. You change. I feel like every decade is like a chapter of your life. Well, a big, maybe a book, not a chapter, but it's not something that... And you know what I hate the most is when people say, oh, well, you've changed a lot. Well, of course I've changed, because, you know, I'm in a different decade of my life right now, and change happens all the time. And by the way, we should always be changing. I think if you don't change, that is probably the biggest red flags ever, because we should always be able to evolve and get better and recognize our flaws, and because we all have flaws, and try and just improve them and make them better for when we're a bit older. Try and look at someone's background first before you point your fingers at them and say, oh, well, you've changed, or you're not like what you used to be before, you're not fun anymore. Or, you know, I feel like I was robbed of my 20s when I had my kids. And not that I'm, you know, sitting here frustrated, because I'm not. I just think that, you know, when you look at your friends having a good time and going out, so it's really difficult to be put in positions like that where you have to be like, okay, well, this is my life now, and I have to stick with it, and I have to make the best what I've got.
I can absolutely resonate with that. You know, we were both the same age when we had our children.
Yeah.
And I think you're absolutely right. But the biggest factor in that for me is that, you know, we do operate in chapters of our lives. And that is so important for people to understand. You cannot stay the same. It's impossible. As human beings, we're always constantly evolving and adapting and responding to our environment. That's what we were built to do. And we go through those phases of, you know, being a mother, having our time with our family. It doesn't mean that you've lost who you truly are. It just means that that is for a different chapter. And you know, coming back to what you said about it being a red flag when people say, oh, but you've changed. That is absolutely a red flag, that somebody is acknowledging that you've changed, but not also having changed themselves. And that is what creates difficulty in relationships, because for a relationship to flourish, people should change and evolve and grow together. And I think that is the key to longevity in relationships. It's that you both share the same outlook on life. You've both got the same goals and aspirations. You both share the same values, but they're not necessarily, you know, static values or static goals. They change and adapt over time and over life stages. You move and grow together. And if one person doesn't, then that is really difficult, because relationships can't survive when one person is stuck in the past and one person is moving authentically forward.
Yeah, that's why it's so important to communicate with your partners or with your friends. I think it's the most important thing in life is communicating, because every time I have been honest and true about my feelings with the people that I've cared around me, it's always been a really, really lovely outcome when we've had the opportunity to speak, you know, truthfully, not just have arguments and just blame each other for everything. I just think it's important that you communicate in a way of, you know, coming from a loving place and realize what it's not working for you at the time. And, you know, you've got to be really raw with it. You can't go around and not be honest. I think the more honest you are, the better results you're going to get from it. What is it that it's not working for you in life at the time? Is there maybe one of you is drinking too much, or one of you does something that, you know, really, really makes the other one really uncomfortable? All of these little things, I'm just giving an example of things that you could change, not overnight. You know, change takes time. That's why you go through decades and it's a long process of change. But I think ultimately be honest with the people around you and with yourself mainly, because that's where it all starts from.
Yeah, doing the inner work is really deeply personal, and you are never going to be on the same timeline as those around you. And, you know, you're absolutely right. Communication is central to all of this. It's not that, you know, there's never the opportunity to change together. If you communicate and work through things together, and the other person is, you know, willing to come on this journey with you, but also for themselves, and start to look at some of those beliefs where they have been conditioned, you know, where they actually want to go in the future, then you're right, change takes time and it's difficult. And if you're willing to persevere and work at it, then it can evolve and flourish. But I think the process of actually going through, you know, discovering who you truly are can be a difficult process, and it's not one that you've got to take lightly. But also you might find that you're starting to seek out people who align with your ways of thinking more often, and this is when we start to discover new friendships and new hobbies and things that we really want to spend our time doing. So I think starting to kind of maybe journal, write down, you know, what our old patterns were or what our old beliefs were, and how this might not serve you well in the future.
I know it's a difficult one, because some people, like you said, well, they can't journal. I mean, I can do it only if I'm in a particular frame of mind. I can't quite pinpoint what that is right now, but it's literally like my biggest therapy is just go and watch the sunset. And that's when it all comes out for me, because I'm just silent and I'm just there in the moment. I think that's another one, just be in the moment. I think that's when you will be able to realize a little bit more of what's going on really deep down. Distracting yourself all the time with certain things is not going to get you to have this big massive realization overnight of what's going on inside. I just think living in the moment a little bit and taking that time to pause and realize that you need that time for yourself.
I totally agree. I think it's so important that you're able to really reflect on, and I keep saying this, but it's always about who you feel the most calm around, the most able to be yourself around. What activities make you feel like that? I love going for a drive and listening to music. That just really clears my head. We both love the sunset, watching the sunset together. But then also it's around recognizing your reactions, your responses, where they're coming from, what triggers you. It's a whole process that people go through. It's not easy. It's not quick.
Yeah, I think another thing that I would like to mention before we finish this episode, a lot of people might not understand what being comfortable with someone means, because a lot of people will mistake it to being, oh, well, I'm fine, I'm comfortable, I feel, safe. What is safety really deep down? Like, what do you think safety is for yourself as the listener? Is it because you feel comfortable where you are in life with your partner or with your friendships, or do they actually calm your nervous system? Because honestly, I've learned that in my 20s, and I now can pinpoint the difference between somebody that makes me genuinely comfortable to the point that I can just sit there and just be my complete authentic self, or someone that is just convenient and I'm all right, it's all right, but it's not great. I think that's where you need to sit down with yourself and ask yourself that question. And I think that's the toughest. It was the toughest for me.
Yeah, there's so much to think about in this episode.
Yeah, it really is.
We've covered so much. I think, the main thing to say is that feeling this way, there's nothing wrong. In fact, it's completely normal to feel this way when you are starting to evolve and grow as a person. So we are going to start covering now real kinds of self-growth strategies and pull together how you can really start to live authentically. And we're going to support you along the way, because we know it's not an easy journey, but we want to create this community that can really support one another.
Yeah, I think it's important, I think, to cover a little bit more topics where we can help a little bit more of how to deal with certain situations in your life. And I think in the time being, just be kinder and just try and be kind to yourself, and have that little pause and sit down and chat with yourself to see what you actually really, really desire in life.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. If you enjoyed our episodes, please do subscribe and share with your friends. And we will leave it there, everyone.
See you later. Bye.